So first, I want to thank the sponsors of this event, the ones that brought it to you. One is TLS, Lakewood Scoop, which is a local news organization. And we thank them for bringing this format to you and hope that you'll find it very helpful. And of course, we have on the screens both Bitbean and Dovies Media. And they are two sponsors on which I think is a really interesting that you wouldn't think that a presentation on off-the-shelf software would have two participants, both with quote unquote in the custom world. But as you'll see, really everything today is reevaluating everything that we're doing, but not discarding things of the past, taking those things and making them work better for everybody. So we're going to jump into this presentation and we're going to try to accomplish a few things. I'm going to try to approach this in a few things, so just a little shopkeeping before we start. First, we have the companies are always looking to improve the way they're working on things, and they always have the challenge and the struggles. It's really interesting that I find in my job consulting companies and helping them use software efficiently, that the larger companies have to think like startups and the startups have to think like larger companies. Because sometimes you think, wow, that large company, hundreds and hundreds of employees, and they probably just have everything right. And usually it's not always like that. They have a lot more challenges. They have more archaic systems in place. So what we want to try to do is we want to try to take a business process and try to see how we could automate it, how we can make it more efficient, but at the same time being mindful that there are employees in place. There are people that are on different levels of technical savviness. And you have to try to have that happy medium of what software to introduce and how to introduce it. So first of all, as a brief introduction, my name is Bruce Ladowitz. If you pronounce it, Baruch Ladowitz. And I help companies use software efficiently. And I've gotten a lot of requests recently, especially with COVID, on how to make things more efficient. Because when you have employees working in an office, and a lot of companies that didn't deal with remote staff, those companies, they're used to having things, you'll have a conference meeting, everybody will go into a room. Or if you're training an employee, there's nothing like sitting face to face with someone and showing them the ropes and printing out documents. And as you go virtual, you start thinking very differently of how you run the business. And even though hopefully we're going to see a ramp down of COVID and we'll get back to normal, I don't think that anything will ever really get back to normal. And I think we're always going to have to be mindful that there are going to be employees that are going to be working remotely. And the more systems you have in place that are automated, the more systems that you have in place that are working together that allow multiple employees from multiple places to work together, that's really the goal of how we're going to try to look at this business automation. And I'm going to show you in different steps, different levels. We have a lot of you on the call today from various different backgrounds, whether it's e-commerce or service businesses or the systems you have in place, whether you currently have more modern systems, or whether you currently believe that your systems are efficient or not efficient. So you have very different levels. I'm going to try to talk to you as a layman. I'm trying to talk to you not over your head, and try to really show you different levels the companies are using, and really every company should use, at least on some level. Let's talk about the first thing, communication. And I think communication is really at the core of what companies have to really solve, especially in the fluid situation that we are right now with companies working remotely. Now, even just last night, I got an email from someone that said, you mentioned Slack and Teams in the advertisements for this webinar. What about Zoom? Where does that fall into? And I realized that a lot of companies don't have the basic understanding of communication tools that larger companies, and really every company is using today. A lot of companies using today to help communicate efficiently. So we have email. Email is a great tool, and we're all used to it. But companies are finding that with multiple teams and multiple employees, communicating with email really is not an option. Let's take a classic example. You send an email, and you have 4 people on that email chain, and then you add a 5th person. That fifth person gets added in, sees an email from 3 replies prior to that, and then they start replying to that, and it's not in context what's happening. So we're familiar with WhatsApp, and a lot of companies were using WhatsApp to communicate one-on-one. So their Slack was a communication tool, that was introduced years ago and was embraced by really the largest companies. And then it became something that's smaller companies. So what is Slack? How does it work? And let's try to see if we can get a little peek into how Slack, whether even if you're using it today, or if you were thinking of using it, how you did that. So before that, I want to just send out a quick poll. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to send you a quick poll to ask you right now what your company is using for internal communication. So I'm going to launch this poll right now. And I'm going to give you all a moment if you could just go and put in your answers. And once you do that, then we'll take a look and see. Okay, they're coming in. We'll give it another few seconds. There are still some responses coming in. And we're going to end the poll now. So I'm going to share the results. You'll see the results that there's 50% that are using email, 30%, which is high, and that's great, that are using Slack or MS Teams, and then 20% are using other. And what usually what other means could probably mean a combination of you using WhatsApps to communicate, everybody just using their WhatsApp accounts. Some people are using project management software that they collaborate within there. Now, so let's just take a step back and understand what is Slack. I get many times, the company will come up to me and say, what is Slack? I heard the buzzword, I never knew what it is. So let's just take a moment to go through what Slack is. I'm gonna bring onto my screen right now, Slack. And what I'm gonna do in purpose of this demo to not have private company information, I'm just gonna bring in a Slack channel. This is a Slack channel called Creative Tell, which is really a communication platform for, it's a communication platform for creatives to communicate. It's really multiple people in different companies, even though Slack is really primarily an internal one. But I just wanted to show you a little bit, just the basics of how Slack works and how it could be a benefit for every company. So the difference between Slack and email is that Slack is going to be able to have what's called channels. And let's think of channels as groups in WhatsApp. So you're part of a WhatsApp group, and you can have 2 WhatsApp groups and 3 WhatsApp groups, and each group is defined for that. But the problem with WhatsApp, obviously, is first of all, is a mixture of personal and business all together in one person's application. And also, it's not very well defined on departments of the company, and it's not meant for a business environment. So Slack allows you to create what's called channels. And you'll see over here, I have various channels. And if I'll quickly actually move to my Slack and show you there's how channels can be set up. So I'll have my billing department, my HR department, my sales department. And each of these departments will have dedicated groups, so to speak, to do that. Now, what's one of the biggest benefits of a Slack environment within a company? You're able to take your communications and you're able to have those communications streamlined within the organization. So each department has their space to communicate with it. But also that, just like WhatsApp, if you're familiar with WhatsApp, when you send a message, if there's multiple messages flying through and you want to reply to one specific thing, you could answer just that line within that message. If you're familiar with WhatsApp, you'll click reply on that one message, and that shows in context. Slack takes that a step further and allows you to go and take those messaging and not only reply within lines, they also allow you to add reactions. So what's reactions? Say someone says, hey, congratulations to John Doe for getting a promotion. So instead of everybody having to reply, hey, great, thank you, you could just add an emoji, a thumbs up, or something along those lines. So over there, it's reducing the clutter that everybody has to deal with seeing 1,000 replies, or the replies could be in line. So let's take a look how that would work within a Slack environment. So these are multiple messages, and so someone shared a resource, and someone over here thumbs up that. If I thumb up it, now you'll see that added to 2, or I could add another one. Let's add a reply. So somebody wanted to go and reply to this. So you'll click over here, and you'll see on the right side, thanks for posting, looks super valuable. So now, when I'm reading through this conversation, this thanks for posting, this looks super valuable, it doesn't disrupt my conversation. It's now going and it's adding it as a separate thread. And now we could have a conversation of 20, 30 messages all on the side over here without disrupting the general flow. Now, when you think of companies and when they go remote, this really becomes critical to help you get all your communications in one place, because really email, and it's one of those things you really can't experience until you try it out. And what I would recommend with companies that are not using Slack or something along those lines, don't introduce it to company-wide. Take one department, the department that is the most open and the most tech savvy and would benefit the most from the solution, and do a test with them. You don't have to move anything over across company, and you really never should move everything company-wide. In most cases, almost every software that you'll implement will be software that can be started off in one department, get the employees to be familiar with it, and then move from there to go and introduce them to other departments that will benefit from it also. One more thing with Slack is that it's also not just a communication platform. It's also used to reduce clutter in terms of notifications. So for example, when, say there's a form that's being filled out, and the form, you have a website form, and the salespeople get email notifications every time the form is sent out. As people get familiar with Slack, they're a lot more open, and it's a lot easier for them to get these notifications all within Slack. So there'll be a channel called New Leads, and as those leads come in, that's all goes into one channel. So now when it's not one channel or one folder, everybody now could see those contacts. You don't have to go and add multiple individuals to an email, and everybody gets an email, it clutters their inbox. They know there's one space to look for all the recent leads that came in one central place, and don't have to log into another system. So if you have 10 different systems sending you notifications, customer service, you're getting alerts from forms that are being filled out, or anything else that's going on within the organization, you have dedicated channels, dedicated folders within Slack to go ahead and do that. Now, just one thing in terms of a lot of noise right now with Slack, Microsoft Teams. And a question I get a lot is, what's best for me? Should I go with Slack or should I go with Microsoft Teams? So my answer to that generally is as follows. If you're a Microsoft organization, that means you're using Microsoft 365 already. You're using Microsoft email, and you're already paying subscription licensing. Microsoft Teams is a great platform. They've started off a few years ago, so much so when they came out, they compete directly with Slack. Slack ran a full page ad in the New York Times, kind of taking a jab at them and taking a jab at Microsoft for not doing things right, and said, it will be hard, but we wish you luck. But Microsoft Teams really graduated to the point, and especially with COVID, they've grew, really, really large, and it's a really great platform, but it's a lot heavier to administer. So if you're a company that doesn't have an IT team, Slack is a lot easier for a company just to basically launch, configure. Obviously, you'll need tech-savvy people or some IT help to go and do that, but by and large, it's a lot easier to administrate. The companies that are using Google, they'll find that Slack is there's first of all a lot more people familiar with Slack in general. So there are companies right now that have moved over to Teams, and there's a lot, but in the general population of employees are going to be familiar with Slack. So you're hiring throughout corporate America, more people are going to be familiar with Slack. And the Slack in general is a platform that has a lot of integrations, and there's a lot of companies that have already integrated, and a lot of them are catching up with Teams. But all things being equal, even though everything is never equal, Microsoft to Microsoft Teams and G Suite and if you don't have a large IT infrastructure, Slack is a great alternative. However, just recently, Google just announced that they're coming out with their own Teams, their own Slack, their own communication platform integrating into G Suite. So if you're somebody that's looking to the communication platform and to looking for a better way for your employees and for your team to communicate internally, I would certainly look into Google's new offering that's being rolled out as we speak and see if that's an option for you. In general, anything that I'm discussing today, I'm never focusing on one specific software. I don't sell software. I don't push any individual software. It's really about what's great based on the dynamics of the company and dynamics of your IT stack and which one is best for you. So I really think I look at it as a category, the category of communication. And that's really the, when you're dealing with Slack and all those different, that category of communication, those are the three guidelines I give you in terms of which platform of those to choose. But certainly if you're a company that wants to really improve the communication internally, you have to look at Slack. It's really something, and I'm surprised how many companies today still haven't embraced that. So let's just look at a couple of questions on that. One of the questions is a great question. Is it necessary to use a paid version of Slack? So the answer to that is really, my answer is going to be with all off-the-shelf software. Off-the-shelf software is notorious for having trials. Your trials put you onto their highest plan. And when you're on the highest plan, then you get bumped down to the free version or a smaller paid version, $10 a user, $15 a user. Inevitably, whenever you're looking at software, you have to look at the plan of the highest paid. And you have to say to yourself, can we afford, or based on all the other software we're looking to, is this something that we want to, is this something that they want to do? So in software in general, and anything I'm going to talk about today, any software you're looking at, look at the highest level of the platform. Never look at the lowest one. You could always choose the lowest one, but know it's there. And Slack is no different. The free version, you will max out. You can only search 10,000 messages. On that end, Microsoft Teams is more forgiving. They give you a lot more in the free version. But if you're not looking to pay for Slack and it's too cost prohibitive, you have too many employees, I would say over there, that's a good reason to go over to Microsoft Teams. It's much, much more cost effective. So let's go to the next thing. I'm going to take a kind of a case study on a specific process, because when we talk about software, there's different levels that we have. We have generalized off-the-shelf software, and that's software that will help for all various things. Let's take a very, simple example that we're all familiar with. We'll take an example of Google Sheets. Google Sheets, it's cloud software. Everybody's familiar in general with spreadsheets and how they work. It's a big benefit over using Microsoft Excel. That's local, and it's perfect. However, there's no structure to it. It's really you dive into it and you have what it gives. What's the next level up? The next level up is moving to a specialized software for like a project management software. Those are software that's meant to manage projects, and companies are dealing with a lot of projects. Then they need something to help them juggle all those projects. Project management software is good for that. If you're hiring, there are specific software for the hiring process. And really, in general, all off-the-shelf software, you really have to look at to see which software, what you need and what's going to be the most benefit to your company, and how narrow to get to it. I will say there's software, and that's what I'm going to demonstrate right now, that could help you graduate and help get your team more into it without overburdening and out becoming a huge restraint really on the whole company that they don't want to change. But once you get used to that, you could adapt to various different areas. So I'm going to show you that right now. And I'm going to share my screen starting with Excel. Just give me a moment. So what I have over here, this is a hiring process of hundreds of applicants coming in for a job. What I did over here is I just randomized, I did a find and replace on the characters within the name, so it can randomize for privacy reasons. And this is a typical way that I see so many companies when they're dealing with really anything. They'll go to their comfort level. What's that? An Excel spreadsheet. So they'll have an Excel spreadsheet. Usually it happens that you have one employee that's managing his own tasks, He'll start with an Excel spreadsheet. Then he has to share it with somebody else. He'll email it to that person. Or maybe they get a little quote unquote sophisticated and they'll have Dropbox and they'll save that Excel file in a Dropbox. And now multiple people could go and, collaborate on that. But we know that I don't think I have to tell anybody that's not really effective. So what's the next level of graduating? You could take the same Excel spreadsheet, which just to quickly go through the columns, there's a rating. You want to put a rating on the candidate. Do you send them a rejection email, yes or no? The notes, if they were hired, set up emails, the start date, if they set up on Slack and sign docs and all the various points that you have to manage with this employee. So what do you do next? You say, okay, I'm going to take this, I'm going to move this into a Google Sheet. So I have over here now my Google Sheet, and the Google Sheet you'll see is very similar to what the Excel spreadsheet was. But Google Sheet, and I will say that anybody that's using Excel, move over to a cloud-based platform. Don't use Dropbox. Don't use things along those lines. It's today, Dropbox was yesterday's news. Today, you want to use apps that are built in for sharing. So a Google Doc, where multiple people can log into this Google Doc. And when they log into this Google Doc, everybody's seeing the same information. But I'll show you in a moment why this is not ideal either. So you have over here this same sheet, and there's a little benefit to it. It's all cloud-based, but you have a lot of different issues with this. First of all, if I want to add a comment, I'm working with 2 other people on the hiring process. I try to go and I add a comment to this. I could add a comment into fields, but what if the next person wants to add a comment? Or what if I have a file that I want to associate with this candidate? Again, I don't have a good way of attaching a file into a Google Doc. So the first piece of software I want to introduce that will help companies graduate from Google Sheets to something that will help them, A, make it more efficient, and B, help with even from the basic to advanced automation, but the ability to start with basic. And that's Monday.com. Now, one of the questions I see over here is, do you have a recommendation for project management software? My answer to that, and Monday.com is in the category of project management software, but my answer to that is no, I don't have a recommendation. There's really a dime a dozen. It's really very specific to industry. But today, there's so much software out there, and there's so many reviews. What I like to do, and a tip that I tell everybody when they're reaching out to software, is 2 things. 1, there's a lot of review sites. So what you do is you find out the category of the software, and then go and see who are the other players within that space. So for example, Monday.com is a project management software. And if you do a few Google searches, you'll see the other players are Asana and Basecamp and many other ones. So you could just Google Asana versus Monday.com, or Basecamp versus Monday.com, or Asana versus Basecamp. And you kind of get a picture of what people are saying and how they're using that software. There's trials, obviously. You could take a trial. You could whip up a trial and try to play around with it. That's the big benefit of today. Whereas years ago, you would have to plan out exactly how you want it to work. Today, you have that luxury of whipping up a software, playing around with it, and then seeing if it's a fit for you. The reason why I like Monday.com, and I really look at Monday.com as what I call a gateway off-the-shelf software, is because the interface and the ramp up for employees is a lot easier than more complicated systems. And even though it's not going to be as sophisticated as some of the other things that are out there, and I think it's a good gateway, because once employees are on there, first of all, anything you use in Google Sheets for, and I say anything you use in Google Sheets for, it will be on a 10-factor better than Google Sheets. And let me jump in and show you how this would work over here. So you'll see right away, I'm going to go to my main table over here, and you'll see right away the interface is very familiar to a spreadsheet. And in a way, it's a lot easier to use. So I have over here, just like I had my rating column over here, I could just click on this and I could choose my rating. I could manage which ones show up over here. All my statuses, I could just click on very easily. I could see this. It's really easy for me to look at and to see what's going on in a quick second. I could filter very quickly. I could say, only show me the ratings that are rating number 4. And then instantly, with really little work, it now just showed me all the ratings that I have over here. But let me show you something that I think is going to really change the way you work with Google Sheets and how to use something like Monday.com to help automate some of the processes and help make it more efficient for people to use it. So if you look over here, I have so many columns, and they're all important columns because they're all columns that I need in my spreadsheet to help me manage this candidate. The problem is that not everything is relevant to everybody working with this candidate. So if I have one person that's just dealing with signing documents, everything else is very distracting. So this is a way that will make it very useful for that one person, that they can remove the clutter. What did I do over here? I just created another view. And of course, I'm not going to go through a demo of the software, but just to show you that I was able to create just a quick view to show you, here are my candidates again, and only showing me the column that I want to show, that's relevant to me. Whereas in Sheets, I would have to start hiding 5 other columns. Somebody else comes onto the sheet, they're going to unhide it, and it becomes really impossible to manage. So over here, I really have a way of going and using this software and focusing on one thing. I want to show you one other thing, and this is within the automation. And I guess the first step, and as we go through in a little bit, we'll go through a little more sophisticated automation. But I want to just show you how a simple automation built into a program like this, once you're using it, once you graduate from Google Sheets, how you could start using this, and how you can use Monday.com to replace everything and then start building in automations. So let's take a very simple automation. I have over here this candidate, and I have a column called hired. Okay, so I have yes or no, and you see I have an option called rejected. Now, every time somebody's rejected, I don't want them to show up on the active list. So they allow me to create a group. In my group, I have all my rejected. Now, how would we work in Excel if we had on the bottom of the list, you have your rejected, you want to move something from the top to the bottom, you have to cut that row, you have to paste it down. Over here, I can just drag it. Okay, that's a benefit in and of itself. But I did one simple automation, and I don't want to bore you with the details, but I'll just show you really quickly. I went to automations, and I said, when the column called hired changes to what? You saw there were 3 options, no, yes, and rejected. If it changes to rejected, move it to the group called rejected. So let's see how that works. I'm going to go over here. I'm going to take this candidate. I'm going to say hired. He was rejected. And you'll see within 1 second, he's no longer there. Now he's on the bottom of the list. There are, within Monday.com alone, there's hundreds of automations that are literally 1 click away. So this is what I call very, very basic, simple workflow automation. Taking a process that you have, documenting it, and then seeing how the software could take the repetitive tasks and help automate that. So you could do things, for example, when a due date approaches, you have a deadline for a client. When the due date, notify the person that is assigned to this project. Or when this candidate's interview is coming up, send an email to someone else. So that's on the Monday.com, and this is really where I think the basic workflow automation really comes in. I want to get into 1 step level. So we already covered how this was done in Excel. We graduated to Google Sheets. We graduated from there to Monday.com. And now I'm going to graduate to a application that's meant specifically for hiring and show you the benefits over there. And really every company has to choose based on based on their infrastructure and what their need is, which one is going to be a good fit for them. So anytime we're dealing with automation and software and whatnot, here's what I find the biggest frustration that companies have. You have a few key employees. Those key employees have everything in their head. And when they have everything in their head, every time a new employee comes in, they have to train them in. And they're not training everybody 100% into what the process is. Over time, they're going to remember something else. They're going to tell that person about it. When you start getting into the mentality and here's where I really think it's critical for every company to approach automation, is that when you do automated processes, you're taking the human element out of it and you're transferring it to a software. It doesn't mean these key people are now not relevant. In fact, they become even more relevant, because now in concept, they're training 100 people at once. So when you're going and putting and defining your business process and what makes you unique and what happens every time. So for example, just like I showed you, when somebody is changed to hired, it moves to a different place. You could set up other actions that way. What would you normally do? So for example, if every time you hire somebody, you send an email to IT to let them know to set up, set up the user email addresses, or you want to add this user to your HR system, or any other things, or you have to ask for a check, the copy of the check and the bank account number. All those things can be built as an automation into the software. And if you do that, the next employee that's coming in and managing the process, they don't have to learn every aspect of that step. They're trained in to say, okay, if you click this button, this is going to set up the ball rolling to move those things. And that's where I really think it's key for companies to understand the mentality of taking the business process and moving it over. And you'll see in just in a few minutes, we'll go into even more sophisticated case studies to really enlighten you, open your eyes to see what's out there, what can and what should be done. So let's move over from here and graduate from Monday.com. And I'm going to graduate to a system called Breezy. And Breezy is an application that's meant just for hiring. So what's the difference between a Monday.com, which is a more general, think of it as Google Sheets on steroids, and a Breezy? Breezy is very good, but only for one specific task. And that is, in this case, hiring. And there's really software for really every micro task within a company, every division. There's software to manage that. There's separate software companies used for HR. So there are some companies that do everything in Excel spreadsheets. There are certain companies that do everything in fragmented systems. And then, of course, there's the larger end of it, where you have more powerful systems like the Salesforces of the world and CRMs that handle a lot of those things together. But really, every company is usually going to have a suite of different things. And the more sophisticated the company, and the larger they are, and the larger the departments are, they'll have dedicated software for each of those. And of course, they're too broad of an audience today to go through that in general, but I wanted to show you how this same exact process graduates to a Breezy. So the concept of Breezy is that it's meant for hiring, and really let me just tell you quickly some of the benefits this will bring to show you what's out there and what can be done. With the Breezy concept, you could go and, for example, you have a nursing home and they're hiring a nurse. With Breezy, you could put your job application there, and you could push it to all the job boards, Indeed.com and Monster.com, whatever hiring boards are out there. Now, what happens? You get flooded with hundreds and hundreds of candidates, and when that happens, you have no way of really, separating the ones that are really maybe a potential fit. So what Breezy allows you to do is allows you to automate the entire process. That means from the time a candidate signs up, they get a welcome email. You could have a welcome questionnaire that goes out to them. Part of that questionnaire is, do you have how many years experience? 1 to 2, 3 to 5, etc. And you say anybody that's 1 to 2 automatically reject. There's a template. It sends an email to them and sends them out the rejection email. You go to the next level. It automatically will move that candidate, and you'll see over here, if you're familiar with Trello, that you could take cards and just move it from one to the next. When I'm moving this over, I actually could have triggered an action right now that sends an email to the candidate and sets another motion into place. So if you have a very well-defined process and there's a constant of repetitive actions that are taking place, to build out this in a Monday.com, whether it's not even possible, this is really meant, and they understand the psyche of a hiring process and allows them to manage and control the process really tightly and really automate that process. So if you are one of those companies that are doing that are hiring, that is something that is really something to look into, to take that and build in all your business domain knowledge on that particular category, and use a software like that will help you automate that. And just realize that these software exists and they're available and they're inexpensive, assuming that it's a good fit for your company dynamics. Next thing I want to do is talk about the next category. So we spoke about already about communication. We spoke about taking a generic software, a Google Sheets, and graduating to a basic project management software like a Monday.com, and even to a very specific. Let's talk about something very similar. And you'll see a lot of the concepts that we're talking about today are concepts that are shared in concept. Once you get into the mode, you'll see a lot of these things will become more familiar. I want to talk a little bit about something that may be a little over your head, just to touch on it briefly, and that is Zapier. Zapier is a software that allows you to communicate between two different softwares. So for example, I have a form on my website, and right now, every time the form gets filled out, I want to have that form emailed to someone. But I also want every entry on that form to go and push to a Google Sheet, or I want to push it to Monday.com, or I want to push it to my CRM system. But this form doesn't have an integration with those. So how do I get that information there? So typically what will happen is a company will go and take that information, will get an email, they'll have a customer service rep go and take that and manually put it into the other system. We all know the issues with that human error involved with that, and completely not efficient. So the next level that we do is something called Zapier. And Zapier is really a software that you'll have to be a little more technically inclined for it, but I want you to know that it exists. And I will say this, in confidence. If there's a company today that doesn't have a Zapier account, there's a tremendous amount of things that they're missing out on. There are so many things on a Zapier level that will help you keep things in sync. So let's take a few examples how it works. When someone signed up for the webinar with Zoom doesn't really have integrations with third parties to push that information anywhere. So I was able to go, and I'll bring it up onto the screen and I'll share it in a moment. And I just want to show you how simple it is to do these things. And I'm surprised with how many companies don't have it. And I'm not surprised in the sense that I didn't realize that companies wouldn't do that, but it's an awareness that how many companies really, there are so many ways that there's so many low-hanging fruit that they can do just on the very basic levels, even if they're not changing the systems overnight. So you'll see over here, I have some zaps. What's my zap? This webinar, TLS Bitbean Dovies 721. It's pushed to a CRM, and I'll show you that in a moment. You'll have, see, it's showing me that anytime there's a new registrant in Zoom, basically take that information, map it to my fields in the CRM, and put all those contact details into the CRM. Simple. That means every time somebody fills out the form, within a few seconds, it's going there. What's the next thing it's doing? I have one that says an alert survey. Anytime I get a new form, send a message in Slack. And then I could decide who gets those notifications in my company, add them to that Slack channel, and they're able to get those notifications. So Zapier allows you to transfer communication from one place to the next effortlessly. And if you're not familiar with it, it's something that the organization should look into it. You could push to MailChimp, to Constant Contact, keep your marketing lists in sync, and it will really change the way that your company will operate and at least keep data in sync and work effectively. The next thing I want to show you is CRM. Or before that, I actually want to show you a ticketing system. Ticketing system is very familiar. I don't want to spend too much time because I think everybody's familiar with ticketing system, but you wouldn't believe how many organizations I deal with that are still using email for support. And just to give you a quick peek into this, and then I'll show you how it all pulls together with a moment. I'll show you how it all pulls together within the CRM environment and really tie everything together. So you'll see over here, these are the tickets that are coming in. My computer keeps crashing. And when I click on one, it's going to show the conversation that's happening. Let's just understand where a ticket system comes in general and why every company that has a large support cases should be using a ticketing system. And I find many cases, not only are they not using email, a lot of companies are using homegrown systems that over the years they weren't able to keep up with. And those systems are not really efficient. They don't have all the availability that are in the modern systems today. So when you have a ticket system, first of all, multiple people could be viewing the same information. When it's with emails, multiple people are getting separate email threads, and it really becomes not efficient. Templates. If you take your top templates, your top customer replies, or you have a knowledge base and you're taking that knowledge base and you want to get all your information into one place, now that becomes reusable information. Instead of every time a customer service agent being trained in and having to deal with so many different emails and how to respond, most of those emails could be there. So for example, if I go click over here and I'll click reply all, I could go over here to add a snippet. And in my snippet, I have over here, boom, I'm marking this issue as closed. You can reply to open it, and it adds a rating for the customer. So without dwelling too much into ticket systems in general, I think the idea of a ticket system, and I'll show you in a moment how it really ties 360 into an organization, really in everything they do. Ticket systems also, Zapier, whether it has a built-in integration with Slack, or it has using Zapier to facilitate that transferring information in those alerts every time a ticket comes in, or say only any one of my top customers send a support ticket, I want to get an alert from that. And then you start having your systems start talking to each other. You could have your Monday.com start talking to your ticket systems. That means anytime in Monday.com you have an issue with something, somebody has an issue, when one of the candidates needs something, you could have one button and create a ticket in your ticket system, even though they're two completely different systems. So that's the mindset I wanted to show you on that. And I want to jump into, because of the time constraint and I want to cover a lot of things, I want to jump into how this all works within a CRM setting. And CRM is the category of customer relationship management. You may have heard of Salesforce and HubSpot, Zoho, and the various other ones that are out there. There's Pipedrive, a dime a dozen. One thing I will caution, most of you on the call today are not really large companies. And I will say, in my experience, dealing with small to medium-sized businesses, Salesforce will swallow a company alive. It's the best, there's no doubt about it. But Salesforce for a smaller organization, in many, many times, unless you obviously you're warranting an infrastructure that supports it, you have the right IT environment and the right budget to support it. I've seen companies pay upwards of $1 million to get a Salesforce implementation. And some of the things I'm going to show you today can be done literally at the fraction of the cost. And for most small businesses, it's something that I think will be a lot more of a benefit for companies to use. So let me switch my screen over here. And over here, I have a CRM. So a CRM you'll find is, if we talked about a Monday.com is Google Sheets on steroids, a CRM is a Monday.com on steroids, and allows you to really manage everything. I'm going to focus right now just on the things that I believe are going to be the most helpful from an automation process. So let's take this lead that came in. It's a lead that came in from my website, and I'm a new sales rep. I'm making a cold call to this individual. So most CRM systems are confusing. Where do I start? Over here, I created a process. So we started by sitting down with the various teams and deciding what that process is. We built that process into a wizard within the software. And then we allowed the end user, the salesperson, or the cold caller in this place, to really have just buttons to click to run through the process. And let me show you how this works. I'm going to click Start Call. The question I get is, answering machine, dead lead, or call answered? I say answering machine. It gives me a call script, and it tells me that there's a follow-up task was automatically created and an email was sent. With that one button, it created a task to automatically follow up with this person. It sent an email to the client letting them know I tried to reach them and the email and how to get in touch with me, and then I'll be calling them again. And then I click save. Next, the call is answered. So the next time I go into this lead, I get a reminder. I go into this lead again. I click call is answered. I have a choice now to use script 1, use script 2, or it's a dead lead. So I say, okay, I'm going to use script 1. It tells me the script that I have to tell the customer. And of course, you could graduate your salespeople off of this to another area. They don't have to use scripts. Those won't see the actual script. They could improvise on that. But in this one, I'm going to say he's in the market for masks. That's what I'm selling. I'm selling face masks. And the opportunity amount is $1,000. Schedule with manager. This went, reassigned this to a manager, notified the manager, and now the manager could take the process over from there. Let's take a quick look at this record just to see everything that I have at my fingertips as a salesperson in a modern organization today. And these are the things that salespeople, whether they're using Salesforce or the other systems that are out there, whichever one is a fit for your organization, to show you what your capabilities are. If you were using Google Sheets, this will completely change the way, or even if you're using some other systems. You'll have over here, I have all the emails. So you'll see automatically tried calling you. At 4:19 p.m., this is the email that was just triggered right now to the customer. I have my Zoho desk. So if I go to my contact, and I'll go to B. Zlotowitz, so I'll have over here my Zoho desk. Where's my deal holding? All the ticket systems I showed you before in the ticket system, which was a separate system that was being used, they're all pulled in for me as a salesperson to know, because I want to know if my customer is happy. If they're having support issues, I want to be on top of that. So I see all the tickets that are related to this particular customer. I could see the quotes. If there's quotes on this person, I could do that as well. Now, what about documents? I have to constantly send over a NDA. So over here, in this case, I'm going to say this is for e-signature. This can be done with DocuSign or with really any other system that's out there. All I say is use a template. I want to go and say I want to use the NDA, an authorization to release information, and one click, I'll send out a e-signature for the person to go and use. So you see over here how, as you go and take your process, even the CRM software, it's kind of coming out base. There is customizations. There are things to go and tweak around with it. But that's where you take your business knowledge, your business domain, the way that you do business, and start building this into a process. And once you have that, everything starts tying uniformly into making the business move more efficiently. I've dealt with businesses that literally went and transformed the companies. Everything from sales to marketing to everything else, all with automation. The same principles in place. Take the repetitive processes, take a software that's off the shelf, that's easy customizable, and rebuild your entire business domain within the software and let that run. Let that run through, and have obviously to tweak it along the way to get as you need it based on your business knowledge. But the average person, when you're training a new employee, imagine training an employee and having these things in place when they're there, so they'll be able to move efficiently. And everything I'm talking about right now can be done with tech-savvy individuals within an organization. Because every company knows where they stand and what software they need in place. So essentially, when you're dealing with software in general, if you have a custom software, and a lot of companies today, there's more custom software being built today than there was in the past, because companies now have other systems to support that. So they build other modules. They may not build as expansive as they did in the past, but they start building specialized things that don't exist, and they tie it all into the ecosystem. But when you have systems like this in place, it starts helping you automate and move forward in your process for your business to get everybody on the same page and to keep things efficient. One more thing I wanted to just show you over here, and that's going to be, once you have a deal that's signed, this is something I find constantly, really regardless, whichever industry you're in, I've always found that the process of managing things in the same way I show you that sales flow of taking a lead and having the salesperson do a cold call and having them just push buttons and guide them through the process. You don't have to train someone in each time what that process is. They're kind of following the road. Within the business process, I want to show you how that works also. So I'm going to click on a, let me just get to one that has, okay, so I have this is a project. This isn't the sales process, but this could relate to really at any stage, even post-sale, when you have a project that has to get done. So you have something that has to get done within the company, and how does it flow through the different departments? In this case, I'm an insurance company. I'm going to send this for an analysis. I have to add some notes, and I click save. What does that do? Now it changed this, reassigned it to an analysis team, and now the analysis team logs into the same record. They go and say, okay, either mark the deal as lost or I want to send them for a proposal. They put the items that have to be done. They have the checklists. They need the insurance, the stub, and the employee cannot move further until these 4 things are done. Now imagine what happens with a regular company right now. You are training people in, oh, we need the insurance, we need the pay stubs, we need the driver's license. Over here, there's very little room for error. They have to complete these things in order to move forward. So I'm going to click save, and now it moves to the next step. I can move this over for a review, or I could send it back to the proposal. And these are literally things that I've built, I would say, in about 2 hours. This flow I built in 2 hours. So this is something that just shows you how you could use that software to do that. And it goes through the process. I could send it for the proposal, I could send the review, and go from there. So you'll see, you see right away that there's so many different areas that company. I want to open your eyes to what's there, what's available, how you could go and use this. And a sales platform like a CRM is very sophisticated for a small company. However, companies that start up, the startups, they are starting with CRMs. Even it's a little complex. So the first employee that comes in, you have to train them in, but once they get used to it, the next employee becomes part of the culture. That becomes the company culture, not the Google Sheets and the Excel spreadsheets. That becomes part of the company culture. One thing I see today, and I think that I'm going to end off with this in terms of, I'm just going to answer a few questions and answers. When you walk into a store today, and I think it's the most prevalent today, and there's masks, and employees not wearing, and the customers or the employees not wearing masks, whose fault is that? It's not the customers and it's not the employees. It's the management. The managements are the ones that decided that they're going to let it slide by if that doesn't happen. If the manager would fire someone that says, if anybody walked into the store without a mask or any employee is not wearing a mask, we're going to fire them, it would be enforced. And same thing is really with the system. And I say this cautiously, it has to be done with wisdom. But thought leadership within a company is the ones that realize that if the company doesn't eat, the employees don't eat. And as you thought leadership, well-defined, makes decisions on software that will help the company 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the road, those are the companies that will implement software, enforce that it's used properly, being mindful that it has to be done in a way where you could train employees in properly, and where the culture, and I would say have the employees themselves lobby each other to use the software as much as possible, as opposed to management trying to push it on them. But these concepts of things are baseline for companies as they get back to business. And hopefully everybody gets back to levels they were before and even greater. And I think it's a good time, especially with all that's going on in the world, to really take pause and see what's available, what's out there, and start looking to that. So easily, so accessible. And every company really should be using that. I'm going to just look through a few questions. We'll stay in a little longer for those that want to extend with some of the questions and answers. And if you have any other questions right now, I'll try to spend a few minutes now and answer some of those questions. So I got questions like, am I going to bring Airtable into all of this? Airtable is another project management system that companies use. I'm not going to do that. Like I said in the beginning, we could go on forever on the various types of software that's out there. And I speak to people many times, and they'll ask me questions. What about this software? How about this one? This one's so much better than that one. And I think I mentioned this by Monday.com. I'm a big fan of how easy it is to implement within the culture of the company. And Monday.com is not the greatest software that I've seen for what they do, but I found that when you implement it into a organization, it's easier for people to engage. And to me, that's very important. It has to be used by the employees and not something that they're going to look frown upon. So that's a criteria I have. I'm not going to get into all the various ones. One thing I will say, personal opinion, in terms of Trello, I'm not a big fan of companies starting off with Trello. Trello is a great, way to get your feet wet, and people have never seen Trello say, wow, this is the greatest thing since sliced bread. But companies inevitably will always graduate out of Trello, and then it becomes really hard to go and graduate away from Trello. Trello, if you're not familiar with it, one thing, if you are familiar with it, don't build a company on it. It's almost like building onto Google Sheets and then being hard to graduate off into something else. There are systems that are almost sophisticated. Monday.com is a good example. It's a gateway one. There are other ones that are a little more sophisticated depending on what the need is. What would I recommend for a startup on a budget? A team of 5 to 8. What I get over time is I get two conflicting answers that I hear from companies all the time. One, when it comes to, for example, Salesforce. Sales is a lifeline of my organization. Salesforce is expensive, but sales is the most important thing to my company. So I'm going to go and why should cost be a limitation factor on that? And inevitably what I've seen time and time and time again, all the companies that did that, is that they've always failed. If the whole criteria was they really couldn't afford that, but, oh, it's just for sales, so I'm going to do that, it catches up. After a while, it levels out. That excitement wears down. It becomes too complex of a platform. You're not getting the demo that I showed you, which was happened to be through Zoho CRM. If you had to do that in Salesforce, it would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. With Zoho CRM, it would cost about $35 an employee. So in terms of budget, I've seen the other side also. Companies will say, well, it's too expensive. I can't spend $10, $15, $20 a month. But think about it the other way. How much are you spending on productivity? How much are you spending on training? How much are you spending on lost time? So if there is a software out there, and especially if it's something like, for example, Monday.com, that is repetitive, that can be used for multiple different types of things because it almost works and acts like a spreadsheet, then I think that really budget is really something I can't answer specifically, but I just use it as guidelines. Is there a simple CRM to use for fundraising or must be done from scratch? There's, again, I can't give specific recommendations, but I want to just take a moment on this to focus on industry-specific software. We spoke about, things like Breezy for hiring and CRM, but there are software that kind of put this all together into a package. Like, for example, attorneys. There's a software platform called Clio, C-L-I-O, that's meant specifically for attorneys. It does everything that's very specific for attorneys, legal signing and everything else that goes into a process, escrowing and all that information. Good example of something that if you have to build from scratch on your own, it would be very difficult, even in a Zoho CRM, even a Monday.com, that software. So if there is one available for the industry, or there is one specific for fundraising, there are, see if that's something that fits your needs. A general guideline I love to give on software in general. If you have software that you have that is 90% there, go for it. Never go and sacrifice 10% and say, oh, because it doesn't have this 10%, then I'm not going to go with it. Always strive for 80 to 90% of what you needed to do, and be flexible that if it doesn't have the features that you need, that you'll be able to live without it, especially if it's a software that's being used by tens of thousands of companies. Because I think the mentality is, I want to just take a moment on this. When we're all used to buying cars, and there's a lot that goes on into a car. But if I'm buying a Honda Accord and it doesn't have a feature of a Toyota Camry, I can't have that feature. I have to live with it. If the solution is not to go and build a new car that takes all the features of the Camry and the Accord, I'm going to shoot myself in the foot with that. I'll never be able to drive a car. By the time I finish building that car, I won't have all the features that the newer cars have. So I have to decide. So many people are happy with the Honda Accord. So many people are happy with the Toyota Camry. I'm going to choose one of these two. And that's one thing I guide businesses a lot in, is not getting hooked, getting fixated on the certain limitations just because that's the way we're running the business. Shift a little bit. That's the benefit of having software. And sometimes you'll find that your company will actually operate a little better. There are tens of thousands of companies doing it. You could do that also. Obviously, there obviously, each company has their own, things that may not be relevant, but as a general guideline, I think that's a good way to approach it. There's literally hundreds of questions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to answer as much as possible. For those that want to stay on, I think that this will bring out a lot of different angles and you may find things very useful. So I'll try to answer as many questions that are here. And I still see there's a lot of people on the call right now. So I'll just continue and going through. So the Zoho One have its own project management software. One thing with Zoho, I love Zoho, by the way. I don't sell Zoho. I don't resell it. I don't make any money if anybody buys it. It's a great platform. Obviously, with caution, there are certain things that you'd want to rip the hair out of your head on how come it doesn't work that way. But in terms of a suite of something that offers, they have everything from marketing automation. They have a support ticket system. This is the one I was showing earlier. They have a billing system that competes with QuickBooks. They have live chat for their website, and everything in their platform all works together. It's all in one integrated suite. So I really like that. They also have a plan called Zoho One, which, believe it or not, is about $35, $40 per employee, assuming every employee in the organization subscribes. So if you have 15 employees, each one will be paying $35 a month, and you get every single one of those software, this support ticket system, the CRM. The problem is that when you have 15 people in a company, it's too much overload. And then if you have 100 people in the company, you don't want to subscribe to everybody there. So they have other programs where they have Zoho One, where you get all the full suite for $70, which you could imagine all that functionality, all that software for $70 a user. That's if you don't want to have it for every single company, every single employee in the company. That's and they do, to answer the question that Moshe asked, yes, they do have a project management software. I happen not to like that project management software. There's a lot better project management softwares out there. But if you are in the Zoho mentality and everybody's familiar with it, and it's like the herd mentality, once you are familiar with the software, you'll become more familiar with everything else that same company does. They try to do everything, even what I showed you before. They call it blueprints, which allows you to set up those wizards that set up actions. When I click this button, do this and reassign it to that. That's all done with something called blueprints. A lot of this software have blueprints built into it. So once you're familiar with that concept, you could adapt it to even to the ticket system. You could set up those things that every time somebody has a problem with a specific model of computer, press one button, will automatically send them this article, will alert this manager, and things like that to help automate that process. Somebody asked me what the ticket software I showed before. That one was Zoho Desk. There's a lot of ticket software out there. Also, really depending on the company, there's Zendesk, which I find is a little more archaic, but it has a lot of functionality in it, but not as modern as other systems. Freshdesk, there's Zoho Desk, and there's a ton more that the companies are using. It really, to me, doesn't really matter which one. They're all very good. It's just a mindset. Oh, this one has this, or this one has that. So it's really just the nuances that change it. Great question over here. And I'm gonna just focus on this just one thing because I'm really passionate about this. Salesforce offers 10 free licenses to nonprofits, and would it be wise to avoid Salesforce? I think nonprofits should avoid Salesforce like the plague. I don't know if this client is on the call now. I have one client, the nonprofit, that was on Salesforce and just had tons and tons of issues. Most of the issues is that not that it can't do everything, it can do everything. It's just the cost to get it to that point is hundreds of thousands of dollars. Every change in Salesforce is layers upon layers of permissions and modules and whatnot. And then you need people to be really familiar. You need, sometimes a full IT person in-house to manage the implementation. So if you're a large company, it's the best platform out there, no, hands down. But for small organizations, like I said, it will swallow you alive. I would really say to avoid it. There's nothing that you're going to be able to implement there that's going to save, because you're getting 10 free licenses or 50 free licenses or whatever it is, that's going to save you money at the end. It's always going to cost you more. And anybody that's looked into CRM systems, they'll see that CRM systems in general, like if you have a third party that has an integration with, let's say, Zoho or with HubSpot or anything else, they'll charge you $10 a month for that third party software. Let's say a live chat that integrates with them. All of a sudden, when you're integrating with Salesforce, it's $25 a month. Everything on the Salesforce is more expensive. And like I said before, it's not an exaggeration. Companies that really go and build their entire company on Salesforce are paying millions of dollars. Now, don't get me wrong. I recommend Salesforce all the time, but it has to be for the right company. It can't be, you can't just do it because either you're saving money, you're a nonprofit and saving money on licensing fees, or you say, oh, I want the best CRM that's out there, so I'm going to do it. I think it's really, think of it if you were able to somehow get a great deal on a import sports car that usually costs $250,000, even if you're able to afford it, every time you need brakes, every time you need a transmission, every time you need anything else, it becomes impossible to deal with all those things. Go get a Honda Accord and you'll be able to run your fleet of car services a lot more efficiently. Okay, one question over here. How would a company go about maintaining version control? A little off topic, but I wanted to address this. How would a company go about maintaining version control on documents that multiple employees need to edit and issue their own versions? So I think when you're talking about version control really means, and it gets more sophisticated with version control when we start dealing with code and building software, but in just a general document. So I have this document and somebody edits it. How do I keep track? So Dropbox has their version of version control, but Google Docs, or if you're using Microsoft and the Microsoft SharePoint and the whole Microsoft end of competitive products on that end, those things have built-in version control. It means that I could go back to a history of the snapshot of the document from any point. So besides multiple people being able to work on the document at the same time, and Google Drive also has version controls. If you look into Google Drive, anybody's using Google Drive, one feature I think is often missed is that Google Drive has a feature that will allow you to do version control, which means you can right click on a document and say, upload a newer version of this document. It will basically take that old document, archive it, and replace it with a new one, but at any time you go back to the original one. So the same file name, and you don't show two files, but that's something that I would say is that you can use for that. Google Drive would be perfect for that. Okay, let's just see a few more questions. My company's worried about information being lost. We would switch to Slack or Teams. They feel that email is much easier to track and find historical correspondence. How you address that? I would say that the answer to that is I really don't like to stand on occasion. I would say in that case, it's 100% wrong. I don't want to, obviously stand up for Slack, and if, God forbid, there's a breach in any of the platforms and, somebody comes, you said not to go to this one. But in general, there's not going to be a difference between using a, relying on email or that. And the question may be if you're doing on-premise hosting. So for example, if you have an on-premise hosting, you're hosting your Exchange in-house, you have everything, you have your backups and everything else. And if you're a large company, I would say that's important. Most smaller companies, just the IT strain of doing that, it's the way of the world right now of cloud, and they have backups and they have, you're dealing with reputable companies. From that perspective, once everything is being hosted online, there's very little difference that's going to be between the limitation of that on Slack or email. And I would really recommend to look into a communication platform that's better than email, because email in business does not work. Simple as that. It's being done. And there are companies that I don't advise to get the Slack, don't get me wrong. Companies with an older culture, older employees, most of them are older or not, tech savvy. Yes, they'll, Slack can be dangerous, but there are always going to be departments that will benefit from that. And then once that works, you'll graduate into other departments. One question was the money.com, it's monday.com as in the day of the week. That's the software I was mentioning before. And now let's just take one thing over here and how it ties together. Every company in the world, I believe, has their inefficiencies of where they're working, but they can't always fix it. It's not probable, but you want to set a vision of what you want to do in the next year, 2 years, 5 years, and start looking there towards this. So for example, if Zoho you look and say, down the road in 5 years, I would love to have all these modules, a support system, and a CRM and everything else, live chat and everything else all integrated in one platform, then if you're looking between ticket systems, Zoho is a good one. But if you have that vision set, then you have that vision there. You'll be able to help that map you which software to choose. But inevitably, custom software is really where it ties it together and makes it different for your organization. Because in really anything that you use, any off-the-shelf software, at the end of the day, you're limited to where that custom software, you'll hit roadblocks of what it is. You always need, and especially if you're a larger company and more than 10, 15, 20 employees or in a specialized industry, that's really where you want to build in those things. And the caution is, always start building in now smarter. I deal with companies all the time that takes their custom software and starts modernizing it to work with the systems out there, whether it means Slack notifications. So in the past, if your system is only able to send out emails, the ability to send Slack notifications. A graduation from that is to integrate the internal system with Zapier. So now anything that you want to do, you can now push to multiple platforms. Any data that's in your custom system, you could do that. And that's really where the bridge and the gap is going to be between off the shelf and with custom. So one more question I have over here is, could I elaborate on the limitations of Trello? Yes, Trello started off as a great way to organize your things. And I know a lot of companies jump onto Trello. Trello is always going to be hit in scale. You're going to have multiple boards you have to manage, and it will not give you the functionality that you need to do that. So for example, if you take a Trello and you can compare it to an Asana, it's a world of a difference. And Asana allows you to have that same flow in general of Trello and the same ease of use. But as you graduate out, you'll be able to use those features, but not have it bog you down in the beginning. Trello will max you out in many different ways. And if you want, you can afterwards, I'll try to go through it, but it's Trello. Just trust me on this one. You will max out if you're building everything on Trello. Okay, so let me just see one more thing over here. Okay, e-signature. What do I recommend for e-signature? So that's another, what I call a micro software that's usually integrated with other things, whether it's your CRM or other systems, or just use standalone. E-signatures, especially today, especially with COVID, that's something that a lot of companies were looking for and embracing. DocuSign is the biggest and the largest. The problem with DocuSign is it looks not that expensive, but it actually is quite expensive. So if you're doing a lot of documents, DocuSign is great, but I put it in the categories enterprise in many cases. And there are other ones like HelloSign, or the other ones that are, Zoho has one. I happen not to love it, but they have a e-signature platform. Those you really have to go and just take the various ones that are there, take trials and see how it works for you. In most cases, a lot of them today are going to be very similar unless you have a very specific requirement. With power forms and whatnot, I don't want to get into that now, but that's what I would usually recommend. Okay, one last question, and this is a big one. It's something that comes over and over. How do you deal with employees that don't want to use the new software? I touched on this a little bit. Let me just expand a little more. Anytime that a company is implementing software, you have to start with the lobbying process. Take your employees that are most open to it, set up a demo, put the process in, and then see how they work within that process. I'll give you an example. A company that wanted to use Slack. It had its Slack, happen within that company. There was a crisis, and everybody was emailing back and forth, and it was crazy. There's a crisis, and emails go flying back and forth. And Slack was introduced. One of the employees in the company said, "Hey, why don't we use Slack for this?" They set it up, and the next time that crisis hit, everybody was almost like a WhatsApp group. Instead of using email, they were all on communicating back and forth. And when the next time there was a crisis, they were prepared. Everybody was already on Slack. That it was already there. So the same thing is really with anything. Start off with a department, start off with individuals, the users that do most, and let that branch out. In terms of thought leadership, that's the hardest thing, and it's not something that only the company owners can really make this decision on that. What software is going to really be a benefit to change the process and shake up a little bit of the culture of the company, and which ones we have to just let dormant. But always think 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the road. Even if you're not going to do it today, are you going to do it a little later on? If you're going to do it a little later on, at least start making plans today. Don't ignore it. It's not going to go away. Technology is going to still keep outpacing you if you're not embracing newer ways of doing things. At least come with a plan and how you want to go ahead and do that. So with that, I want to thank you all for joining. Thank you again to Lakewood Scoop and to Bitbean and to Divi's for bringing this session to you. Hope it was informative. I hope that you learned something, enlightened, opened your eyes, and I wish you well, and thank you for joining, and have a great day.